Yeah, we will learn Lila Nishmas for Shalema for all the and of course our thoughts and tefillas and prayers for all the injured. Unfortunately, there were a couple of deaths, but all the injured in Eretz Yisrael and all the chaos that has been going on there. We hope and we pray that Baruch Shalom will continue to be Mali Rachamim for all of our brethren. That's what we say, the Achenu B'nai Yisrael. We really have that in mind. It's a very powerful thing. Okay, so we actually turned the page to Mem Gimel Amid Beis, but I just want to go back to Mem Gimel Amid Aleph on the bottom because we started that Mishnah, and since we're going to continue on, I think it's helpful if we just review quickly that Mishnah on Mem Gimel Amid Aleph at the bottom, and then we'll go back and continue. So this Mishnah, which is a continuum of the previous Mishnah, where we're talking about a shaliach or a shomer or even a ganef or a gasel in some cases. What is the halacha? How do we treat
Shari?
How do we treat the issue of where a pikadon, an object, has changed possession, not voluntarily, and then something happens to the pikadon. Either the pikadon is destroyed, or the pikadon is devalued or increased in value. So, when you think about this, these are very nuanced issues, because I'm not sure in the secular world, when we in our din and in the common law, for instance, there is again, there is some law, but to delve into this is something that is particular Talmudic and particular Torah. It's a Torah way of approaching a problem. So, for instance, whereas this Mishnah tells us that if a person misappropriates a property, then what do you do? What do you do if you find, now, general rule, if the property is intact, you return it. Okay, that's a simple solution, you return it. Problem is that we're not about simple solutions, and we're talking about a situation where the property is no longer available to return. So what do you do? How do you value the property so that it's properly returned? So the Mishnah started out by saying there's a machlokes between three Tanoim, Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, and Rabbi Akiva, is what you do when somebody misappropriates. So very, very quickly, Beis Shammai says that you owe it, when you want to return it, you have to look at the value of the property. Remember, if the property itself is around, you return it. But if it's not, you look at values. Has it increased in value? Then you got to give him the increase. Has it decreased in value? You give him no less than what it was. You can never give less than the value. But if it went from $100 to $90, you got to give the 100. But if it went from 100 to 120, you give the 120. So his was a pretty straightforward approach, Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel says something which Rashi says is a little cryptic, and that, in other words, Beis Hillel says that b'shas haitzah, at the time of its departure, and we don't know what that means. And again, the Gemara touches on what does it mean, hotzah. What does that mean? It's not here, it's departed. And Rabbi Akiva says that the value is at the time that you are in front of the judge, what is it worth? So that's, again, it's definitive, but in the back of your mind, you realize that according to Rabbi Akiva, if it went down in value, you could potentially be giving him less than what he stole. But that's, again, the subject of our discussion. Okay, so then we went over this Gemara, which I won't go over in detail, but I'll just say that Rabbah gives, the Gemara says that he quotes Rabbah about the Brisa, where a person took a barrel of wine and he drank from it. It was worth a zuz when he started, and it was worth 4 zuz later when he drank from it. So again, the Gemara elaborates on that point and says that according to Beis Shammai, you pay, if it went up, you pay the 4 zuz because it increased in value. But if it went down, then you never pay less than 1 zuz, which was its original value. And then the Gemara says there, why? Because we learned in a Brisa these are the important rules. Kol hagazlan mishalim b'shas hagzela. A gazlan pays the value at the time of the gazela. Now, just so we understand, the point of gazela again is a issue in the Gemara. In other words, it's not clear when we say the point of gazela, what is the point of gazela? And that's very important for this whole Gemara we're going to learn, is to pinpoint the moment of gazela. It's not so simple to say, oh, when he took it, that's the gazela, because we'll see, as the Gemara will elaborate, that may not be the point of gazela. That may not be the moment of theft. Is simply when he took it. Under certain circumstances, that's not the moment of gazela, as strange as it sounds, and we'll see that. So anyway, in Beis Shammai, as we said last week, it's pretty straightforward that you pay either the one zuz in the brisa or the four zuz. Okay, so let's go from 5 lines from the bottom, where Tanan. Okay, so now we're going to quote the Mishnah, so we'll start there. Tanan Beis Hillel Omer, Beis Hillel says b'shas hotzah, at the time of hotzah. And if you saw Rashi in the Mishnah said, when we were doing the Mishnah, Rashi said Beis Hillel Omer, the Gemara meforish Micah Omer. The Gemara will explain what he means. Now this is this Gemara. Now, when you say at the time of departure, here are the options. Ilema, if you say b'shas hotzah min ha'olam, when it leaves the world, i.e., meaning when it was destroyed, it's no longer here. So b'chaser, if it went down, mi'ikalamanda Omar, does anybody in his right mind say that if it was worth less than what he stole it, that he pays less? Of course not. That would not make sense. So clearly, Beis Hillel says if it goes down, you pay what it was worth when you stole it, right? Because of that brisa that we just said, that you pay at the time of the gazela. So clearly, it has to be, let's say in this case, the one zuz, and it devalued to a half a zuz, you pay the one zuz. Now, the ibi yeser, if it goes up in value, what would Beis Hillel say? That you pay the new value. Says the Gemara, the last 2 words, Hanu Beis Shammai. That's Beis Shammai. So what's the machlokes between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai? If Beis Hillel says hotzah and he says the same thing as Beis Shammai, that can't be, because we know there's a machlokes here. So again, the point of the Gemara is we're going to try to understand the differentiation between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, and of course Rabbi Kiva. But so far, if we say hotzah means that he pays from when it leaves the world, meaning it's destroyed, there's no difference. So now let's get to the top of Mem Gimel Amud Beis, where we're going to go. Ella pshita b'shas hotzah mebeis habalim. It doesn't mean when it was destroyed. It means when it left the ownership, and then under the hands of the owner, that's considered hotzah, right? That's considered hotzah. Now, if that's considered hotzah, then the Gemara says, what's the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? So let's understand. Says Rashi, Elapshita b'shas hatzom beis habalim, kishas hagzela, at the time of the theft, will be yeser, and we're only saying be yeser, because there can't be a machlokes if it goes down in value, because again, Beis Hillel will never say you have to return less than its original value, and that's Beis Shammai. So he doesn't have to argue on Beis Shammai on everything. So clearly on Bechoser, if it goes down, no argument. Rashi says, Ubeyeser pligi. Well, the argument now is between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel only if it appreciates. The Kamar Beis Shammai, Imhukra, Yilka, L'Shalem, Kishas Hotzah Min Ha'olam. So now the machlokes is that Beis Shammai says, wait a minute, what does he pay? He pays the value of what it was when it actually was destroyed. Hotzah Min Ha'olam means destroyed. And that would be the higher price. So Beis Hillel Amr, Kishash Hotzah Beis Habalim, that Hotzah means when it left the possession of the owner, and at that point it hadn't yet appreciated. So now we have a legitimate machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, because they're each saying Hotzah is something different. Beis Shammai is saying Hotzah means Hotzah min ha'olam, and when it left the world, meaning it was destroyed, it was worth 4 zuz. But Beis Hillel says no. Haitzah means when it left the possession of the owner. And the time it left the possession of the owner, it was worth only one zuz. You can't saddle the gazlan with more than what it was worth b'shas haitzah. And Beis Hillel defines haitzah min habalim. So now we have at least a legitimate machlokes. We're not saying they say the same thing because each one hangs his hat on a different haitzah. Beis Shammai says haitzah means min ha'olam, and Beis Hillel says it means mibeis habalim. Okay, fine, no problem with that machlokes. What is the problem? Says the Gemara, Lema Rabba Damaka Beis Shammai. The problem is simple. The halacha in the Torah, we know this from our many different discussions, and that the overwhelming majority of halacha between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is like Beis Hillel. Now, if it's like Beis Hillel, except for a few exceptions, then the outcome of any particular Gemara can't be that there should be a Manda Omer who will hold like Beis Shammai. Because the Torah tells us that even though Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, that post Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, nobody, no achronim, no amaroim, nobody later will slug up Beis Hillel in favor of Beis Shammai if it isn't only in those exceptional cases where the halacha is like Beis Shammai, right? That's a given. But according to this Gemara, Lema Rabba Damaka Beis Shammai, it'll turn out, going back to Amud Aleph, when we learned that brisa from Rabbah, that Rabbah, who was an Amora, will come along afterwards and he'll hold like Beis Shammai. Because what does Rabbah say in his brisa? He says that if you have to look at, in other words, if you either pay b'chaser the amount that it was worth when he stole it, the lower amount, or b'yeser, or the higher amount. And if you pay the higher amount, that's Beis Shammai. But according to this version of our Gemara, Beis Hillel would say that b'yeser, you pay the lower amount because haitzah means from the balim, and at the time it went out of the possession of the balim, it was not worth 4. It was only worth 1. So all he has to pay is 1, and Beis Shammai says he pays 4, and comes along Rabbah and says he pays 4, like Beis Shammai. How can that be? We just said that it can't be like Beis Shammai. So we are now caught betwixt and between, that we have a machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, which in effect is negated by the fact that Rabbah, who was an Amora and came later, holds like Beis Shammai. Not possible. So this can't be the machlokes. In other words, if we see that as great an Amora as Rabbah is going to hold like Beis Shammai, then we have to go back and reanalyze the Gemara and say we made a mistake in understanding the machlokes Beis Hillel Beis Shammai, because we came out with an ending that can't be, meaning that an Amira, a Rabbah, one of the great Amira, will hold like Beis Shammai. So that can't be the machlokes. Do you see how the Gemara works? So in other words, at the time that we're discussing the machlokes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, fine, we have a good machlokes. Haitzah according to one means this, Haitzah according to one means that, end of story. But when you go back and in retrospect understand the Gemara, the consistency isn't there because Rabbah comes later and he paskins like Beis Shammai in this machlokes. And we're saying, how can Rabbah paskin like Beis Shammai? The halacha is like Beis Hillel. So you understand how the Gemara works here. It's a very, the Gemara later in looking back, we realize that can't be the machlokes. In other words, we have to slug up the machlokes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel as being in the definition of haitzah, one saying it means min ha'olam, one saying min habalim, because that can't be the machlokes, right? Okay. Any question on that? We can look at that, but that's pretty clear that this is a mistake. There's a problem. Amalach Rabbah, says the Gemara, if that's the case, then no, then we have to look at it differently. But what does Rabbah say? No, we're going to return the tables. When it's talking beyeser, meaning that it increased in value, everybody agrees, even Beis Hillel agrees that you pay, but haitzah means at the time of destruction. So now we're going back on Beis Hillel. We're saying Beis Hillel doesn't mean that haitzah is always Baalim. No, Hoitzah means at the time of destruction, which means that he holds like Beis Shammai and like and Rabbah is good here because Rabbah says the same thing, that you pay 4 zuz because that was later on, it was worth 4 zuz. When is the machlekes? Says the Gemara, Kipligi, Bechaser. The argument is Bechaser. Beis Shammai Sabrei. Now here we come into a very important machlekes. Beis Shammai holds shlichus yad and tzricha chasaron. We had this Gemara earlier. What does that mean? That means there was a machlekes in the Gemara. When you do shlichus yad, when you misappropriate a property, at the time you appropriate, does there immediately then have to be a chisaron, a loss? In other words, and this is what I meant earlier when I said, what is the moment of gezela? If you convert a property and nothing happens, meaning there is or isn't a loss to the owner, is that conversion? So let's think about that a minute. You know, if I steal something and essentially nothing has changed, is that theft? So, and we'll explain that a little bit more in a minute, but theoretically, so now Beis Shammai says, Shlichus yad ein tzricha chasaron, says Rashi, Kipligi, let's go. Kipligi b'chaser v'kama Beis Hillel b'shas ha'tzom in ha'olam, v'kokashalach kol ha'gazolim b'sham b'shas ha'gzela, ib'gzela mamish t'gzela mi'ikara ha'chinami. Aval hacha the behisra also lidei liyoda u'mishum shlichus yad k'machayiv le b'hai pligi. So the machlokes is in shlichus yad. Beis Shammai said shlichus yad ein tzricha chasaron, says Rashi, u'mishisholach bo yad, and when he misappropriated afal pi shalach chasra, even though there was no loss at that moment, have a gezela. There's still gezela. Become a bershusei, and it now goes into the possession of the gazlan. Ukeshahuzla bershuso, and when in the gazlan's possession it went down in value, huzla, it went down. Now, if it's still here, like we said at the outset, if the achefetz is there, he says, take it, it's yours. No harm, no foul. Here is the object, take it back, the barrel. Now that it's no longer here, he pays the value at the time of shlichus yad, even though at that moment there was no chisara. Okay, that's Beis Shammai.
Rabbi, can I ask an interpretive question?
Yes, of course.
Is Beis Shammai only talking about in the event it's destroyed? And
yes,
and Beis Hillel's argument may not be directly with Beis Shammai. They may be, they agree that when it's destroyed, it has that value. But what happens if it's not destroyed and there's a situation of transfer because of claiming the article as their own by the Shomer Chinam regardless?
Well, again, superimposed on this whole discussion, and I think you hit it. If the article is here, if that barrel is here, if it didn't get destroyed, everything is status quo ante, then there's no machlokes. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel both agree. Give it back to him, and we have no dispute because the chayfetz is here, and the chayfetz dictates what we do. So if the chayfetz is here, then Beis Din makes him give it back. End of story. We have no longer any machlokes. Right. Now, the only machlokes is if the chayfetz is not here. So if the chayfetz is not here, then we previously tried to make a distinction between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and we failed. The Gemara now is saying, you know what the underlying distinction between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is? The underlying distinction is what their opinion is on shlichus yad. Do you need to have a trigger of loss or not in order for it to have changed possession? So according to Beis Shammai, shlichus yad ein tzricha chasaron, that at the time that he misappropriates, even if nothing changed, possession changed. It became the gazlan's because he misappropriated. So at that point in time, it's now the Goslin's property. Now let's look at this chayfetz. This chayfetz is no longer here. It's devalued. But what was its value at the time of the transfer of ownership? The shlichus
Well,
yad.
that's what I was trying to understand,
Yes.
because I thought the point was only if it's destroyed, not if it is.
That's correct. You are correct. Only if it's destroyed. Correct.
So if he takes over command of the article as his own, but it's not destroyed, is Beis Shammai's theory limited to only if it's destroyed, or
Yes.
is it?
Yes,
Okay.
because everybody agrees when it's not destroyed, there's only one outcome. You return it.
But if
Beis
it's,
Shammai and
but
Beis
if,
Hillel agree.
but destroyed means he's sold it to a third party, given it away. Is that
No.
destroyed, or the article's destroyed?
The article is destroyed.
So then I don't think everybody agrees in that
One second.
situation.
If you say he gave it away, if he gave it away and we can trace the article to that third person, then we reverse the transactions, and the article goes back to the original owner, and the Goslin has to compensate the person to whom he gave or sold or whatever that article, because as long as the chayfetz is in the world, it still has to be returned to its original owner.
But if it's something that can be used and and then erodes or is used up, is that destroyed, or is that, and isn't the issue the value when the Ganef takes it over? Is it the original value or what it was at the point of
Yes,
Gazlanus?
it is the value according to Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai. This is now you've heard. Now this is the actual machlokes. According to Beis Shammai, it's the value at the time of when the gezela actually happened. When was that? The moment he misappropriated it, we say that's gezela. That's the moment of gezela. What was it worth then? 1 zuz, 3 zuz, 4 zuz,
Right.
whatever it was worth. Now, the moment of gezela is not the moment of destruction.
Correct. That's what I'm trying to distinguish.
It's not. No, the moment of gezela is the moment of gezela only.
Right.
Why? Because he supports the theory that shlichus yad ain't a shlichus chesarim. There doesn't have to be any change in the chayfus whatsoever in order for you to say he's a goslin. So if we've now pinpointed the moment of gezela, we have to ask ourselves, go back and find out what it was worth. At the moment of gezela, it was worth 1 zuz, 4, whatever. That's what Beis Shammai says you're chayiv to pay. But let's just go one line later. But according to Beis Hillel, shlichus yad shricha chisaron. In other words, the Gemara doesn't say it, but we're now arguing that according to Beis Hillel, you have to have a chesaron in order to be there shlichus yad. So the moment that the Goslin took it, he misappropriated it. It didn't change possession. It still technically belongs to the original owner. So even though it's in the possession of the Goslin, but for valuation purposes, we say, what's its value at that point? That's the moment. In other words, later on, it gets destroyed or removed from the world, right? So later on, when it gets destroyed, it's still in the possession of the owner because there was no chisaron yet. This is the key word. There was no loss. When did the loss happen? The loss happened later when it was destroyed or whatever happened to it. But at the time of the gezela, even though it was not in the physical possession of the owner, it was technically still his. Beis Hillel says it's technically still the owner's. That's the machlokes between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai says, no, it was stolen, it's gone, even though there's no chisaron, that key word. And Beis Hillel says, without a loss, you can't pin anything on the Goslin, even though the Goslin took it. So now we're interpreting the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel on the fact of, was there a chisaron or not? Beis Shammai says, doesn't matter, you don't need a chisaron. Shlichus yad is shlichus yad. And if it was worth whatever it was worth, then that's what you have to pay. Beis Hillel says, wait a minute, the actual gezela didn't happen until later. That means all this time that it was not gezela, that's the value. And if it was worth only one zuz, that's all he has to pay. He doesn't have to pay 4 zuz because it was all in the possession of the owner. So nothing changed.
So according to Beis Hillel, when does that possession change? If he uses it for himself and it's not replicable, is that when the loss is concerned? When he does something with it? I'm trying to understand. I understand Rabbi Shammai's theory. I don't understand Beis Hillel's.
The loss is, remember, we're talking about Hatzom in Olam, that it's no longer here, right? We
Right.
already established that. So the moment of loss, when it's no longer here, that's chisaron according to Beis Hillel. The moment it's lost, not the moment of theft, of misappropriation, which could have occurred earlier, of course. It's later on when it actually disappears from the world because it's destroyed. That instance, that's the moment of gezela. What's it worth then? Then we have a legitimate machlokes because according to Beis Shammai, it's 4 zuz because the gezela happened, and according to Beis Hillel, no, it didn't happen. Nothing happened. Just the fact that he took it doesn't trigger the chisaron. And you have to have chisaron, according to Beis Hillel, in order for there to be a penalty, so to speak, that you have to pay the higher amount. So if you look at it this way, he stole it on a Monday. Okay, on a Monday, it was worth, and the Monday was worth a zuz. It then was destroyed on a Tuesday. On a Tuesday, it was only worth a half a zuz. It was worth a half a zuz, but on Monday when he stole it, it was worth a zuz. Beis Shammai says you got to pay the zuz because chisaron means the moment of gezela, which was Monday. Beis Hillel says, wait a minute, he stole it on a Monday, it was worth a zuz. He didn't destroy it, it was still worth a zuz. Okay, whose possession is it in? Technically, it's still the ownership of the original owner, not the Goslin, because nothing happened. Then on Tuesday, it gets destroyed. But on Tuesday, it's only worth a half a zuz. Says Beis Hillel, he has to compensate him a half a zuz because the chisaron was triggered on Tuesday, and on Tuesday, it was worth a half a zuz, and it was still in the ownership of the original owner. That's the technicality that is the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. If according to Beis Hillel, the original owner still owned it on Tuesday because there was no chisaron, and it went down to a half a zuz, then that's all that the Goslin is responsible to pay, because he has to pay him the value of the gezela b'shas hagzela. Remember, the Brisa told us kol hagazlonim mishalmim b'shas hagzela, that a Goslin pays only at the time of the gezela. Our discussion here, Michael, is when was gezela? According to Beis Shammai, it was Monday. According to Beis Hillel, it was Tuesday. Now we have a legitimate machlokes because now we see that they're arguing over a point in which there can be a machlokes.
But Rabbi, it goes back to the point last week that someone who's watching it and wants that article can intentionally do something to it, get value for it at a time when he has to pay less than the amount there so he can make a profit. So if it's still not clear when the gezela took place, because as long as it's in possession, according to
we are now defining, according to this version of the machlokes, Michael, we're defining when the gezela took place. It took place when there is a chisaron. The word chisaron is in bold letters here. Before, we didn't talk about chisaron. Now we're talking about, when the gezela happened? The gezela was triggered only when there was a chisaron. According to Beis Shammai, the chisaron was the moment he stole it, Monday. According to Beis Hillel, the chisaron wasn't until Tuesday when it was, according to Beis Hillel, disappeared from the world. If it disappeared from the world on Tuesday and it was worth a half a zuz, Beis Hillel says that's all you have to pay, half a zuz, not a whole zuz. I'm not sure what
Destruction.
I'm trying to understand what the issue is here. What are you
I'm
troubled by?
I'm troubled by the fact that it could be used in something. So, I mean, we have the definition of gazela, as you said, if it's in the person's possession, according to Beis Hillel, if nothing happens to it, it's still in their possession, even he may have misappropriated it.
Right.
So you don't have the knowledge of when the misappropriation occurs. If it's destroyed, you have evidence of misappropriation. But there are many things that can happen besides destruction. If it's something that can be used in the production of something else, if it's something that's sent away, if it's something that's planted in the ground on somebody else's property.
Okay. Okay.
And so
do you want an exact definition of destruction? Destruction means it is not in your purview. You don't see it, you don't know from it, you can no longer control it or be the owner of it.
So if you transfer that piece of property or you sell it,
right,
it is destruction.
Correct. Let's say that when you sell it and it's not in front of you right now, that's destruction.
But so I don't want to belabor this because it may come out later.
You're hitting on a point that has to be fully understood, because you're now I see what your issue is. So when we say destruction, this is the whole issue on Beis Hillel. What does Hotzah mean? What does it mean, destruction? So what we're saying in this machlokes is that according to Beis Hillel, when it is no longer in the largest sense of the word, in the broadest sense of the word, it is no longer in front of us. I don't care if Levi has it or Yehuda has it. That doesn't. I don't care. It's not here. As between Reuven and Shimon, it's not here. If it's not here, it's Hotzah. It left us. It's gone. Don't worry about, oh, he planted it, he'll make money, or somehow we're going to trace it to a third party. That shouldn't come into question in this discussion, because at the end of the day, he doesn't have it. It's not here, and he has to do restitution. And let's say he gave it to Levi, and Levi went to Eretz Yisrael, is not coming back, and this barrel is no longer here because Levi has it in Eretz Yisrael. It doesn't matter. In other words, what I'm saying is it doesn't matter. As long as it's not here, we have to define what does Reuven owe Shimon for the Gezela. And we're saying that what he owes him is the value of the barrel at the time when there was, quote unquote, a chisoron, a loss.
So just clarify one thing. If he sold it to a third party for 5 zuz,
right,
and they benefited 5 zuz, which presumably was the value at that point in time, does the Ganef get to keep the 4 zuz profit and pay back only 1 under each of their opinions?
Okay, so according to Beis Shammai, for sure he has to pay the 5 zuz because he already had misappropriated it earlier. He had taken away, so it was no longer in the possession of the owner, and you can't kind of, oh, it was the owner who took the loss. According to Beis Hillel, if at the time of the chisoron, if it was increased in value, he agrees with Beis Shammai, you pay the 5 zuz. The machlokes here is if it went down in value. I agree with you. It went up in value, no machlokes. You can't profit. But if it went down in value, then the question is, in whose possession did it go down in value? According to Beis Shammai, it was in the Gazlan's possession. Therefore, he has to reimburse to the original price. According to Beis Hillel, it was in the owner's possession when it went down in value. The owner can't turn to the Gazlan and say, you know what? I'm taking a hit here, but you have to pay for it because, and the Gazlan says, look, I stole it. I have to reimburse you. But it was in your possession when it went from 4 to 1, from 4 zuz to 1 zuz. Why should I pay you 4 zuz? Remember, it went down. So why should I pay you 4 zuz, which was the original price, when it was still in your possession, when it was devalued to 1 zuz? So the whole machlokes now between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is only in decrease in value, and we pinpoint the moment of chisoron. Beis Shammai says the moment of chisaron is when he stole it, misappropriated it, and Beis Hillel says no. Chisaron is when it disappeared from the world, i.e., he sold it or got destroyed, whatever. So if the stock market went down and that commodity was now worth less, the owner took the loss, not the Goslin. Now, you may look at this and say, but that's not fair. Why should the Goslin benefit? The answer is, technically, al pi halacha, he's not benefiting. All we're saying is that when he, quote unquote, misappropriated it, the chisaron had to have happened. And if the chisaron happened after it went down from 4 to 1 zuz, you can't blame the Goslin. I mean, he looks like the bad guy, but he only misappropriated something that was worth 1 zuz, not 4 zuz. So we have to parse through the facts, and we realize that according that's the machlokes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. That Beis Hillel is saying that you can't blame the Goslin for the depreciation of the chayfetz when it was still halachically in the possession of the owner.
So the fact that he usurped control of the article for his own benefit, despite that, he doesn't suffer harm because of the transpirations of
because of the word chisaron. When did it actually trigger? And that now again, Beis Hillel is being very lenient on the Goslin. There's no question, because he's technically saying that when it went down in value, it was not the Goslin's loss, it was the owner's loss. Beis Shammai is taking a harder position and saying, why should I give this Goslin a pass? I'm going to say chisaron happened the moment he misappropriated it, and therefore I'm going to penalize him. And the halacha is like Beis Hillel. The halacha is that technically, and again, you may not like the outcome, but you're looking at the legalities of it. If you're saying chisaron, when was there chisaron? According to Beis Hillel, there was not chisaron when he misappropriated it. According to Beis Hillel, yes, there was. So that's the machlokes.
Right.
I mean, it's a very thorough. Yeah, go ahead.
So a couple of things. So one is, I'm on the side of I don't think this isn't fair, but one thing is that if it was stolen on Monday, it was worth 4 zuz. In the meantime, something went on, and all of a sudden, this thing is being effectively devalued. Let's take an example. He stole it was matzah, and he stole it in the middle of Pesach. Middle of Pesach, it's worth $20 a pound. The end of Pesach, it's worth $1 a pound.
Right.
If the real owner, if he still had it in the middle of Chol HaMoed, and he would have, avoided buying more matzah on Chol HaMoed for the last days of Yom Tov or whatever. So he could really be out of some money here, and yet, by the time the matzah got really lost from the Goslin, who didn't go ahead and eat it, or maybe he ate it and it's lost, whatever. So now it was after Pesach, so now all of a sudden it's worth less money. I mean, the owner is really, really out. But the other thing is that
that's a great example, but that's exactly the point, because even though the sympathies lie with the owner, he took a loss, but the halacha, the legality of when he actually lost ownership is what's at stake here.
Okay, so let me give you this example. The guy steals it out of his house, and scenario number one, he doesn't see what happened, he doesn't know who it is, chases after. Eventually, after Pesach, he figures out who it was, and it turns out it was destroyed after Pesach, and okay, so he only gets $1 a pound. Alternative number two, he sees the Goslin as he's running away. He chases after the Goslin dumps the matzah in the river and runs away. It's equally destroyed, and now the Goslin owes him the full value.
And Beis Hillel at that point would say, if it was really, you're right. So according to Beis Hillel, in that scenario, he would say you got to pay the value at that moment. If it was still $20 a pound, you got to pay $20 a pound. So even though he agrees with Beis Shammai, but for different reasons, because Beis Shammai still says that the trigger is the moment of misappropriation, but it could be the same loss, Menashe, could exist at the moment of misappropriation and at the moment of destruction. It could happen that that the devaluation wasn't until later. So Beis Hillel would say, I'm on board. You got to pay $20 a pound. But in our scenario, in order to understand the machlokes, we're saying that it happened when after Pesach, as you point out,
Right.
it was worth $1 a pound. And you're going to scream and say, but for the duration of Pesach, the owner lost the option to use it. He has to buy other stuff. How can you possibly say that he should take the hit? Says Beis Hillel, because my sympathy is with you, but chesaron has a specific definition. And chesaron doesn't mean when it left your house. It means haitzah, when it was destroyed. And if it was destroyed the day after Pesach, you're out of luck. If it was destroyed Shvi Shel Pesach, you're in luck. If it was destroyed Isru Chag, you're out of luck. So you're really right that this machlokes turns on that key date of when chesaron kicked in. Beis Shammai has no problem. It happened immediately.
Right.
But it's interesting, again, for our discussion, everybody here probably agrees that Beis Shammai's theory should be the correct outcome here. Why should this poor guy pay $20 a pound be out all of this money because he didn't have it? Our sympathies lie with him. And there's no question. But halacha, we say we paskin like Beis Hillel. You're going to say that's unfair because what we're doing is we're really penalizing the owner. And the answer is you have to be blind to that. You can't look at the emotion of it. He's really right. He lost it. Because al pi halacha, and sometimes halacha, we say that halacha includes justice, din and rachmin. The mercies here certainly are with the owner. But there are times when you have to look at the very technicality, and we say, you paskin like Beis Hillel. Because why? Because this Goslin is not considered to have misappropriated it yet, even though he removed it from the possession of the owner. But here's the thing, that item can still be restored.
Right. So actually, I was going to get to that. Was going to be my other point, which is right, which is we have another example somewhere. I know I've seen it, I've heard it many times. So I think I've seen a commentary on the Chumash. So I'm sure there's in Gemara somewhere, which is that somebody steals a piece of lumber. If you catch him with the rule is one thing if you catch him and he returns you the wood. But if he takes it, if he sells it or destroys it or builds it into something else,
right,
then it's a whole different category. You don't make him take it out of the bookcase, even though you know that's your piece of wood.
Correct. And Michael, to your point, Michael, this was what you were talking about earlier. In other words, where is this chayfetz? And the answer is it should still be somewhere in the world, but it's no longer available to us for restoring. That's the point Menashe is making. Go ahead.
I don't understand why he doesn't have to restore it.
Well, Menashe just made a good point. If you have to restore it, but if he built it into a bookcase, we're not going to tell him break the bookcase.
Then he returns the value at that point. Right. So Menashe, and actually to that point, we saw with the pandemic where lumber prices went way up and then went way back down, and so the price, even just a simple piece of wood, could change in the interim. It could go up, it could go down.
Right, and we have to have tunnel vision here and just look strictly at the word chesaron. And I know, Michael, I'm with you that it seems unfair, but we have to look technically at the halacha of what is chesaron. And chesaron, according to Beis Shammai, is triggered the moment of misappropriation, and chesaron is triggered according to Beis Hillel the moment it is no longer available to us, i.e., we can't return it because it was broken, because it was sent overseas, because it was built into a bookcase. All of those are examples of you can no longer return the chayfetz. We're not going to make him break the bookcase or go to Eretz Yisrael to bring back a piece of lumber. We're going to say it's gone. Now, At the moment of when it was gone, Beis Hillel says, what's the value? That's the real machlokes. Now, again, on the upside, there's no machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. The real key here is on the downside, and it seems unfair that Beis Hillel is going to give the Gazlan a pass because it devalued, but by legal definition, and by the way, I mean, if I were to argue this case in court, and we would have this discussion, let's say this was a common law issue, then my expectation, if I represented the Gazlan, is that he would not have to pay the price, the higher price, because call it the technicality. The technicality of Chisaron didn't trigger under his watch, it triggered under the owner's watch. It went down from 4-1 before it was destroyed. The stock market fell. He has to take the loss. I mean, we could go around in circles and say not fair, but that's really, we say, by the way, al pi halacha, that in most cases of machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is the mekel. Beis Shammai is the machmir. This is a perfect example. Beis Shammai is the machmir. He wants full restitution for the owner, and Beis Hillel says you can't get full restitution because it wasn't depreciated under his watch. So again, emotions aside, let's put our, because we really, I think all of us here today may agree that Beis Shammai should be right. And of course, what does Chazal tell us? But B'Yemais HaMashiach, it'll turn around and the halacha will be like Beis Shammai. So maybe in the real ultimate world, Beis Shammai is right. But in our world, the limited world that we have, the halacha is like Beis Hillel, who is mekel, and he's mekel on the Gazlan.
But Rabbi, I still have a problem with the timing of Chisaron, because somebody can, a Shomer Chinam can improve an object, and at the time that they start altering the object, in essence, the object still exists. They may be adding to it in their way and misappropriating it, but it still exists. So, you know, to establish the value of when is real chisaron, is it while it's still in, you know, he's retrofitting it, shall we say, or improving it. Did it happen at the beginning of when he started that, when he said, I'm going to take it for myself? It's hard to establish the timing of that.
Okay, so let me add one word, because I see what you're struggling with, and it's a very fine point. So let's just say that chisaron means, here's it, chisaron means you can no longer return it. If it's out of your hands and you can no longer return it, that's chisaron. That's the moment of chisaron. If that's
return it as it was, or return it, period.
Return it to the owner, and
Yes, but in what state?
Return it in its fully usable state.
Yes, yeah. So we're being very, very definitive that he can't return the item the way he took it, because it's built into something else, because we know that he took it to Eretz Yisrael, because it was chopped into little pieces, because it fell into the water and was swept away and is no longer here. However you want to look at it, it's a dava, it's no longer ba'olam. It's not in a position where he can say, here it is. And the Gemara makes a very important distinction that when you have the item as it was, don't worry about value, just give it back. But when you don't have the item as it was, and you have to give it back, and now you have to do valuation, then we look at this discussion of chisaron. So now you're troubled by the fact that, but maybe there's still something he can do to give it back, and therefore he should be able to do that. And the answer is, if he can, the answer is yes. But in the examples that we discussed that Menashe gave, it's not here. For any reason that you want to conjure, it's just not here.
But when do you derive the value at that point? Because there are a lot of things that went into.
What's the value at that point? That, according to Beis Hillel, is the moment of the chisaron, and objectively, we probably can. What was the market for that matzah, or for that piece of lumber, or for whatever it was, at the moment when it was no longer returnable? we can pinpoint that to an almost accurate degree, and that's what he has to pay. And if it's less than it was originally, so be it. Beis Shammai says, no, can't be, because the devaluation happened under the Goslin's watch, not under the owner's watch.
Rabbi, I'll make one last point and then
Yeah.
I'll stop. But
Yeah.
in all these cases, this is a shomer chinam. This person is doing something. He's watching the article. At that point, when he decides, it seems like the halacha is very makel on if the shomer chinam wants to do whatever the shomer chinam wants to do, they can do it. And it doesn't really matter. They're supposed to be watching. There should be additional responsibilities on the shomer chinam, even though there's no restitution for his watching. That's what he's asked to do, and that's what he's agreed to do. So for him to procure this and do whatever he wants with somebody else's stuff is theft, and he's being rewarded potentially for his theft.
Well, I hear what you're concerned with, and again, that's Beis Shammai speaking. He's being rewarded for his theft. Beis Hillel is saying that he's not being rewarded for his theft because theft doesn't happen. I mean, the shomer chinam has to, in some fashion, make good here, and because we're saying that his status as a shomer chinam changed. Now, a shomer chinam is potter a gazela and aveda gazela, but not when he is the thief.
Exactly.
Right. So now we have to pinpoint the moment when he is the thief. So we're saying shomer chinam. We understand all of this, but Beis Hillel says that you didn't become the thief until it was a chisaron. And by the time it was a chisaron, it already had gone from 4 zuz to 1 zuz. So we cannot hold you accountable for that loss, because all the time that it was devaluing, it was not devaluing under your jurisdiction. It was devaluing under the owner's jurisdiction, and the owner can't benefit. Again, there's no question that the equities here are with Beis Shammai. I will agree with you, and I don't think that the Gemara is. I mean, even the svara of the Gemara is not that it's inequitable, because Beis Hillel says the only reason why this is the halacha is because of a legal definition, not an equitable definition, and we say that the halacha is like Beis Hillel, even though it's a legal definition. And I know we could go around and around, and you've made some great points here, but I think at the end of the day, what you have to accept, even though it may go against the grain, because we're all saying that l'chayra Beis Shammai should be right, but we're saying that from a legal point of view, Beis Hillel is saying, forget about all the emotion. Let's look at what happened when. And this machlokes this machlokes of, what do you call it? Shlichus yad and it's tzricha chesaron, or tzricha chesaron overshadows the equities, and we have to look at the halacha of shlichus yad. And Beis Hillel says that the trigger for shlichus yad is a chisaron, not just a change of possession, but an actual chisaron. So when did the chisaron happen? That, according to Beis Hillel, it's when it was no longer in the world. According to Beis Hillel, the chisaron happened, like you keep saying, Michael, the moment he took it, because normally you say he's a goslin, and in the case of Menashe's matzah, he clearly took it on Pesach, and he clearly caused the owner tremendous monetary loss, because $20 to $1 is huge. So therefore, Beis Shammai would say, pay the piper. Beis Hillel says, no, you can't do it. Look at it that way. And again, you're right, Michael.
And Rabbi, the Torah goes so far to protect people's values, to ensure that this is just the antithesis of that, because it basically says we want people to do things for other people. We want to try them to follow the Torah, to not be gazlonim, And then this basically invites it. It's just, it's so contrary to everything the Torah teaches us. And I know that in the time of the Torah, people had more reverence. I understand that they were not expected to act that way. In this case, it's like saying it's okay in today's world, trying to look back at the rules. It's like saying, well, it's okay if you think you have an opportunity to make money over watching someone else, you'll restore what they got, but you're jumping ahead and taking the advantage of what is their property. It defies every Torah law, piece of Torah law.
I understand. I really understand what troubles you, and we're hanging our hat on a legality, which in virtually every other situation we would say, but legal has to be accompanied by equity, and the equity clearly is on the side of the owner, and so this is an exegetic argument that you have to say. Now, I'm not saying this is the halacha that the Shulchan Aruch paskins. I'm just saying that the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is one that gives us an opportunity to understand that how can I say it? The gazel, the shomer was caught here on a down market. In other words, the market just happened to crash, and the value of that matzah or the value of that barrel or whatever it was at the moment that Beis Hillel is saying he converted it happened to go down in price. And notwithstanding all of our discussions, it does defy the equitable values that we have. But the Gemara is trying to show us that if that Beis Hillel, if on a strictly legal matter, not an equitable matter, on a strictly legal matter, Beis Hillel is mekel and Beis Shammai is machmer. Now, be comforted by the fact that in the larger sphere of things, Beis Shammai is probably going to be right, and you, in other words, we'll feel that everything worked out the way it should. But the Torah is telling us that for whatever the reason, maybe it's a mystery to us, that between Chumrah and Kula, we should really look at the Kula. And if the Kula somehow is inequitable, unfortunately, that's the way it is. And I know everything you've said today, and this has really been a very thorough, deep understanding of the Gemara, goes in the face of what we should walk away feeling is the right answer. But from a legal standpoint, and again, that's why we say for the most part, this is strictly a I'm not going to say theoretical, but a way of understanding the deeper insight and saying, well, Beis Hillel is wrong here. Beis Hillel is giving this Ganav a pass. That's not right. And so that I understand, that feeling I understand. So let's say that at the end of the day, al pi halacha, that's not the answer. We're just trying to understand the position of two great scholars, Hillel Shammai, Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai, and their opposing viewpoints. Because strictly speaking, when the Mishnah says that Beis Shammai always goes by Chesaron and Cheser Uviyeser, and always sways on the side of the original owner, Beis Hillel says that's not the way I look at it. I only look at it one way. What's the value in Heitzah? So this whole Gemara, and we'll stop here, but we'll continue, that we're trying to define Heitzah. We thought Heitzah meant Heitzah min ha'olam. No. Then we said it's Heitzah min ha'balim. And then we say, no, it's back to Heitzah min ha'olam, but under the guise of Shlichus Yad Shlichus Yisar. So we're vacillating back and forth, and we haven't finished the discussion, so we will still find an alternative. But as we sit here, what comes into play is a series of halachic sort of decisions, which I understand it feels like it's not equitable. So I think we just have to we could continue the discussion, but I think we have to accept that that's the machlokes. But I want to finish the Gemara today with a punctuation which may satisfy you, Michael, because let's just look at the Gemara for a minute. Frank says the Gemara, Elohad Amar Rava. Wait a minute, you're telling me the machlokes between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, shlichus yad tzricha chesaron and tzricha chesaron, and therefore, according to Beis Hillel, he pays the lesser amount. Had Amar Rava, shlichus yad ein tzricha chesaron. Lema Rava de Amar Beis Shammai. So remember, in the previous Gemara, we slugged up that whole situation by saying that Rabbah will come out to hold like Beis Shammai, and that can't be. We're saying the same thing again, because in the machlokes of Shlichus Yad, there is the great Rava who holds, he sides with Beis Shammai, that Shlichus Yad ain't tzricha chesaron, in which case he holds like Beis Shammai. So this can't be the result that we hold like Beis Shammai, because there's in halacha, by the way, there is the following theory, that when there is a machlokes between Tanoim, and then there is an Amora who holds like one side or the other, we go like that Amora. If there is a later Amora who says the other, we go like the later Amora. In other words, we always paskin like the person who's closest to our generation. So forget about the fact that in the original there was a machlokes between Tanoim. If one of the Amoraim paskins like one of the two Tanoim, then we say that Amora is right. So here Rava was an Amora, and he came back and said, you know what, shlichus yad ain't tzricha chesaron. That means he holds like Beis Shammai. So if he holds like Beis Shammai, then this whole discussion of the last hour plus falls on its ear, because we're trying to say there is a machlokes. No, there's no machlokes. Rava defined it. We hold like Beis Shammai, and that can't be, right? In the larger sphere of things, that can't be. So we're going to go back to the drawing board. And Michael, you're right, that at the end of the day, this machlokes is so deep and bothers us so much that ultimately Rava, who came along and said, I hold shlichus yad and it's tzricha chesaron, he didn't mean to say I paskin with Beis Shammai. He just said shlichus yad and it's tzricha chesaron. It turns out that that's Beis Shammai's theory. So then he falls into Beis Shammai rather than Beis Hillel. And we say, you know what? That's good enough for us. Rava's an Amora, and he paskins shlichus yad and tzricha chesaron. That's the halacha. Shlichus yad and tzricha chesaron. So inadvertently, he's supporting Beis Shammai. And we know that can't be, because we have a haftacha. We know that Beis Shammai is only right in a handful of matters. Beis Hillel is right in most matters. This is a matter where Beis Hillel is right. So we can't. And as the dichotomy of Rava passing like Beis Shammai and our knowing that Beis Hillel is right means that there is a failure in our understanding of this whole discussion, and we have to take the discussion and take it off the table. So you have a really terrific point, Michael, by saying that ultimately halacha should be correct. It should be something that we're satisfied with, that we did the right thing, right? That's what your point is that it should be the right thing. And what we're saying is we're going to take our right hand, scratch our left ear, and come out to the right thing, but for a different reason. Because Rava, who was the Paisik, seemed to hold like Beis Shammai. And if he holds like Beis Shammai, the whole discussion is now null and void. So the last hour that we spent arguing and debating and trying to understand, you're right. You're right, Michael. In other words, you're not right that the halacha isn't like Beis Hillel, but you're right because the right answer was, no, this can't be the machlokes. This discussion of shlichus yad, tzricha chesaron and tzricha chesaron can't be the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. So what we're going to stop here, and what we're going to say next week as we pick up is, so what's the machlokes? Where is the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel if it's not shlichus yad, or if it's not what we said last week in Rabba's view? So we're still out there, and there will be an answer, I promise you. We're going to find something that will distinguish Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, which at the end of the day, you're not going to say, Michael, this can't be. It's not fair. So stay tuned, and we're gonna hopefully find the right answer. But it's a very interesting discussion, because I didn't want to tell you in the course of our discussion that, by the way, Michael, at the end of the day, this is not the machlokes. I wanted to thoroughly discuss the machlokes, and at the end, almost as an afterthought, but everything we said, forget about, because it doesn't matter, right? But again, Torah Lishma means going through the whole inyan and having the discussion that everybody, and Menashe was 100% right in the way he presented, is having the discussion, and at the end saying, okay, but the equities will survive. Now, it doesn't mean that we paskin like Beis Shammai. That's still an anomaly, by the way, that Chazal have to deal with, is that for Olam Hazeh, let's just say, in our world, we have to be makel. We have to be more makel. This is the famous Rabbi halacha that when it's split down the middle and I can't decide between kula and chumrah, I'm going to go kula, because Rabbi Shalom will never charge me with doing the wrong thing if I'm makel, but he will charge me very strongly if I'm machmer where I could have been makel. So understand that in the world we live in, you always look to a yes, not a no. We are not a no people. I mean, no is the end result sometimes, but we're not a no people. We're a yes people, which means that the suffix, what do we say? Suffix d'oraisa l'kula. It's only the Rabbanan who come in later and say, wait a minute, we can't be so makel. So suffix the Rabbanan is different. But mid'oraisa, under the Torah, the way the Rabbi Shalom wants us to live a world, suffix d'oraisa l'kula. It is to a leniency, and that's Beis Hillel's theory. It's suffix d'oraisa. Beis Shammai says, wait a minute, you can't do that. I mean, we're a people that has to actually define the equities. So I think today's was an eye-opening discussion. I'm really pleased, even though we didn't make progress. We really defined this very clearly, and at the end of the day, we found a way to make you satisfied, Michael, and all of us, to feel that that what tugs at our heart, that this poor owner who has the $20 matzah and he's stuck with it when after Pesach is not going to be slammed. That something will turn out to be right. Okay, so if anybody has any follow-up postscript, otherwise a fantastic discussion. And Mitzvah Shem, next week we'll try to find another avenue to define the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel.
Yeshkoach, Rabbi.